If you're looking for the best tablet you can buy right now and don't worry that much about pricing, you've got two choices. Are you getting the Microsoft Surface Pro 7 or the Apple iPad Pro? Both can cost well over $1,000, especially if you include the accessories. So which is the better one for you? I'm NJ from mynexttablet.com, and that's what we'll discuss in this comparison. Before we start, I'm using the 11-inch iPad Pro, but there's also a 12.9-inch one that's more similar in size to the Surface Pro 7. Besides the screen size, both iPad Pro models are pretty much identical. Let's start this comparison with their inner values first. With the iPad Pro, we're getting an Apple A12X ARM processor with 4 or 6 GB of RAM. You can choose between 64 GB up to 1 TB of internal storage. By the way, the 1 TB one is the only one with 6 GB of RAM. LTE 4G is an option too. Inside the Microsoft Surface Pro 7 runs an Intel Core i3, Core i5 or Core i7 10th generation processor. You can get versions with 4 to 16 GB of RAM, and you can choose between a 128 GB to 1 TB SSD. There's no 4G option at the moment. My Geekbench 5 comparison is very interesting because they get almost the same results in this benchmark. While the Surface gets a better score in the single core test, the iPad is faster in the multi-core test. Those differences are minor. However, you can see a huge difference in performance when looking at the compute test, which measures graphics performance. Keep in mind that Apple's tablet is 1 year old already, so the new version should be even faster. Well, benchmarks are one thing and not a perfect way to compare the two because their platforms are different. In real life, both are super fast. You can browse the web with lots of open tabs with both tablets, and multitasking works great and super fast as well. All Office apps run fantastic. However, it's interesting to see that the iPad Pro feels faster in some cases. For instance, Photoshop is loading faster than on the Surface. That's not due to pure performance. I think the reason for that is the operating systems. iPadOS is more modern than Windows is, it's much newer. And that means that Adobe was able to use modern technologies when developing Photoshop for the iPad from the ground up, while the Windows version is carrying decades old of baggage in addition to new tools. And yes, Photoshop for Windows has more features of course. Well, there's one Adobe app that was developed new for both platforms. It's the new video editor Adobe Premiere Rush. To compare their performance, I edited the exact same video on both and rendered it. To push out a 9-minute and 40-second 4K video, the Surface needed 10 minutes and 31 seconds. However, the iPad Pro was much faster with just 4 minutes and 10 seconds. That's a huge difference. Sure, I should also note that you can use many more professional class video editors on the Surface Pro 7 like Premiere Pro. And you don't get apps like these with all pro features for the iPad Pro. Some get close, but it will probably take a couple of more years until we get a true Premiere Pro replacement. There are tons of differences when you compare the operating systems. In the past, iOS used to be more restrictive than Windows, and that hasn't changed. However, Apple improved a lot with iPadOS. Multitasking works fantastic now, and we get a real files manager. Yes, you can even connect external SSDs or other kinds of storage and transfer Word documents, PDFs and other files. That works very well with the USB-C port. The iPad Pro has a huge advantage if you're looking for a pure tablet without a keyboard. Inside the App Store there's a much larger selection of apps that are optimized for touchscreens. The selection is not just a bit larger, but a lot larger than the Microsoft Store. You cannot just get one decent video editor that's optimized for touch, but several. You can also get great note-taking apps, programs for your finances, or apps to edit photos with. Yes, some of them are for generation Instagram, but Adobe Lightroom runs on the iPad Pro too and is optimized for touch. And you get Adobe Photoshop and even good alternatives like Affinity Photo. Microsoft's Office apps like Word, Excel and PowerPoint run well too. In addition to that, you can get a huge amount of optimized games. Many of these apps do have some restrictions compared to their desktop counterparts. I'd say they offer about 90% of the features. That's the case with both Photoshop and Lightroom, but also with Microsoft's Office apps. If you need some specific feature, you might not be able to use it with the mobile versions. With the Surface Pro 7 on the other hand, you get normal Windows 10. It's the same Windows you are probably familiar with from your laptop or desktop PC. That means you can use all those apps you might be used to, like normal Photoshop, normal Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, as well as the standard Office apps. You get access to the full file system in Windows 10, and you can do whatever you want. Do you need an app that you've been using for decades? Yes, that will probably run great on the Surface. If you are a software developer, you will have the same experience like on your laptop, for instance. Windows has proper mouse support too. Sure, you can connect one to your iPad as well, but it's just emulating the finger. With Windows, you can use a mouse to be faster and more productive in general. Starting with Windows 8, Microsoft began to include touch features too. They're not perfect, but work fine. Once you turn on the tablet mode, you can use Windows with your fingers very well. At the same time, you get great handwriting recognition and lots of features for the Surface Pen. That stylus is well supported in apps like Photoshop too. And don't forget, that is real Photoshop with many more features than the iPad version. Now, with that being said, Windows 10 is not great if you're looking for touch-friendly apps for other purposes. There's no YouTube app, for instance. You can use it in the browser, sure, but when you want to watch it in bed, a proper app is easier to navigate using just the touchscreen. That's the case for many other applications. You can use most things on the Surface Pro, but it's either a desktop program that's not optimized for touch or a website. That's the case with games too. You can play thousands of games on the Surface Pro 7, and especially older ones or not the demanding ones run great. But almost all of them are meant to be controlled by mouse and keyboard and not by the touchscreen. Some touch-friendly apps do exist on the Microsoft Store, of course. Among those are Netflix, a solid Twitter app, and some feed readers or drawing apps. But the selection is much smaller. Let's get to the displays. You can get the Apple iPad Pro with an 11-inch or 12.9-inch screen, while the Surface Pro 7 has a 12.3-inch display. According to Apple, they're using a liquid retina display, and Microsoft uses a Pixel Sense display. Well, that's just marketing. What you should know is that viewing angles are great on both, and the resolutions are very high. Both iPads have a pixel density of 264 ppi, while the Surface Pro 7 has one of 267 ppi. So to be super exact, the Surface is a tiny bit sharper, but in real life they've got the same amount of detail. I think contrast and color reproduction are excellent on both. If you look very closely, Apple is a winner regarding the screens. You're only noticing it when comparing them side by side, but the iPad Pro is a bit brighter, and it has double the frame rate with up to 120 Hz. You won't notice that all the time because Apple is adjusting it dynamically. However, some say they can see a difference immediately, but I'm not among them. Their pens are different too. In both cases you've got to buy them separately and they usually cost over $100. They've got over 4,000 levels of pressure sensitivity, which means that with both pens you can draw a thin line by pressing lightly and a harder line by pressing harder, just like with a real pencil. The Apple Pencil 2 is made of a matte plastic with one flat side that's touch sensitive. Using gestures you can change tools, for example. A super interesting feature is that you can connect the stylus magnetically to one of the sides of the iPad Pro. Once you do that, the pen gets charged wirelessly. Microsoft Surface Pen is made of metal. It has one button on its side and an eraser button on the back. While you can magnetically connect it to the side of the Surface 2, it won't be charged that way. You've got to replace a battery occasionally. I've noticed some differences with their tips. The one of the Apple Pencil 2 is harder, which means that you can slide across the screen without any resistance. With the Surface Pen, on the other hand, we get a softer tip that you can also press down a little bit. For me, that makes it more feel like real paper. However, I'm not a designer or a painter or so, and I've heard from some that they prefer the harder tip. I guess it's a matter of taste. By the way, you can buy different tips for the Surface Pen if you want a harder one, but that's not an option with the Apple Pencil 2. Let's get to their design and build quality, and let's get something similar out of the way first. They're both made of metal, they have a metal body and feel super high-end. The build quality is fantastic on both. However, there are huge differences when it comes to their overall designs. The iPad Pro looks much more modern because it has slimmer screen bezels and is just 5.9mm thin. That makes it seem a bit fragile at times, Microsoft hasn't changed their design for years though. The Surface Pro 7 has big black display bezels and the tablet is quite a bit thicker with 8.5mm. Microsoft is weighing 775 grams, which is more than the 631 grams of the 12.9-inch iPad Pro and much more than the 468 grams of the 11-incher. Both are much lighter than most laptops. I really like the built-in kickstand of the Surface Pro 7. That's a fantastic feature and that's why I don't mind that it's a bit thicker. I should also note that the Surface has well-hidden air vents, which the iPad does not need. The Core i7 version is the only one with active fans though. Another feature I like on both is their USB-C ports, but on the iPad Pro, that's it. There's a USB-C port and nothing more. Microsoft is giving us an additional headphone jack, a USB 3.0 Type-A port, the Surface Connect port and a microSD card slot. The 7 and 12 megapixel cameras of the iPad Pro are quite a bit better than the 5 and 8 megapixel Surface cameras. Here you can clearly see that Apple has more experience with their iPhone cameras. You can unlock both tablets with facial recognition. It seems like Apple's Face ID works a bit better than the facial recognition of Windows Hello, especially in the dark. However, overall I think both are great. I also noticed that the 2 speakers of the Surface are very good for a Windows tablet, but the 4 speakers of the iPad Pro offer a clearer sound and a stronger bass. Microsoft is the clear winner when it comes to the keyboards. You can get official ones for both, and again, you will have to pay over $100 extra. The one from Microsoft is connected using a magnetic connector. Once you close it, the display is protected. It also has a magnetic bar, which lets you use it at an angle so that it's not lying flat on the table. I think the Microsoft type cover is the best official keyboard of any tablet. It's a full-size one, you've got real keys to press down. They even have a background light and they feel great when typing. It's a premium keyboard and the writing experience is like on a laptop. And we get a touchpad too. Apple's keyboard is connected magnetically as well and it covers the back of the tablet so it's protected from scratches. In this case, the keyboard does lie flat on a table and can't be angled up. The keys don't have a background light and you can press them down a little bit only. And sure, the one of the 11-inch iPad is a bit smaller, but the 12.9-inch one is similar in size. Overall, the keyboards from Apple are much worse. Now, don't get me wrong, in fact I've written tons of articles with the 11-inch iPad Pro and that keyboard. I like to use it when I'm sitting in a cafe and want to concentrate on a long text or so. But it's only a good choice if you want something small and light, like the 11-inch iPad Pro itself. You've got to make a compromise between mobility and comfort. The keyboard of the iPad is too bad to use for 8 hours every day. With the Microsoft type cover on the other hand, I feel comfortable using it for hours and hours. The only compromise you've got to make here is with a small touchpad, but the keyboard is pretty perfect. Their battery life is very different. While the iPad Pro got a runtime of 18 hours in my battery test, the Surface Pro 7 lasted 11 hours only. For this I'm always looping an HD video at medium brightness and turned on Wi-Fi. We are arriving at the end of my comparison between the Microsoft Surface Pro 7 and the Apple iPad Pro. My final verdict is very clear and I think for most it will be obvious which tablet is better for you. The Microsoft Surface Pro 7 is the best choice if you're looking for a tablet to replace your notebook or desktop PC with. It behaves just like a normal Windows 10 laptop does. The keyboard is fantastic and the performance is like the one of a premium Ultrabook. At the same time, you can use it as a pure tablet without the keyboard, either to watch Netflix or to write down some handwritten notes with a Surface Pen. I think the Apple iPad Pro is the best pure tablet, an excellent second device. You can use it as an entertainment tablet and it's fantastic for games due to the larger selection of the App Store. It's great for digital notes too. And sure, the performance is good enough to get some work done as well, probably not as your main device, but it's a perfect compact companion for when you're on the go. And some, like photographers for instance, can do quite a lot with it. Alright, that's the end of this comparison between the Microsoft Surface Pro 7 and the Apple iPad Pro. If you have any questions, please feel free to write me down below in the comments and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm reviewing pretty much every tablet that is released almost worldwide. Thanks for watching and see you next time.